So I'm going to demonstrate how to make a vector image out of a photograph. In other words, um, a vector image is going to be something that we can cut on the laser cutter. A vector is a line file, basically, so that the laser knows where to draw or cut its lines. And it's best to start with images that are not reliant on a lot of detail in order to understand them. So portraits work usually fairly well for this. Text works really well for this. Things that are really high contrast graphic images usually work well. So I decided to start with a portrait image, and being approximately the anniversary of George Floyd's death, I thought that this would be a good image to start with for this. What we're going to start off by doing is converting it to black and white, which you can do by hitting Command Shift U on a Mac, or we can go to Image Adjustments, and desaturate is somewhere here. Yes, towards the bottom. And then the other thing we need to do is make sure that we're working with approximately the right resolution. So the size, basically what we're going to do is we're going to turn this into a halftone, a bitmap, basically. It's different size circles to represent the different values, kind of like a newspaper would print images. If you ever look at newspapers up close, they use multicolor, but we're going to work with just monochrome, positive, negative, black and white, basically. So what we need to do is we need to make sure we're working with the right size of resolution, so our holes or our circles are the right size. So I'm going to go to Image Adjustments. I didn't mention this. I'm working in Photoshop. Sorry, image size is what I meant to say. And I'm going to make my longest dimension approximately 10. And I'm going to put in a resolution of 300. So usually working with 8x10 or something of that size dimensions. This is going to make the image a bit larger. You can see that it was 4 megabytes and it's sizing it up to 17. So about 4 times the size, 4 times the resolution. But we need that sort of standardized. And you can play with the size of the holes, larger or smaller. Obviously, if they are larger sized circles that it creates, then it's going to end up taking less time for the laser cutter to cut it. And if you go with a lot more resolution or a lot smaller size holes, then you end up with a lot of smaller holes that'll take much longer to cut. Okay, now I'm going to convert this to a halftone. So I'm going to go to Filter, and under Pixelate, Color Halftone. Again, this is meant for color, but we're going to work with it being just one, instead of separating cyan, magenta, yellow, basically, and black for our circles. We're going to make all of them the same. We're going to make them all the same angles. So if you type in 45, 45, 45, and 45, that relatively lines them up in a diagonal pattern, right? If you put them like 0, 90, they'll be all vertical. But 45 seems to work best for this process. And then you want to have your max radius between about 20 to 40. I'll put in 20, and what that's going to do is it's going to make more holes, more smaller size holes. And I'll go ahead and I'll hit OK and show you what that looks like. And then I'll go back and I'll put in 40 so that you can get an idea of how that controls it. Okay, so here is, oh, and I skipped a step that we'll go back and we'll fix. So let me zoom in on this just a little bit, and you'll see kind of what the pattern looks like. So they're all lined up on a diagonal, right? They get smaller and they get larger, but when they touch, it's actually a problem. Okay, so if you think of this as the white is the piece of paper or cardboard or mat board or whatever we're cutting into, the white is going to be what remains. Well, that will keep the kind of lower half and the central, the portrait part all connected. But all these little X's sort of that appear in the top corners, these will actually just be pieces that will fall out and they won't stay connected to this. So we need the background white pattern to continue throughout the background. So I'm going to step back in my history and we're going to fix that real quick. So after I did my image size, I'm going to go in and I'm going to make an adjustment. I'm going to go to image adjustments levels. Now, the thing that you can do is you can hit auto and that will actually add more contrast to your image overall. Let me zoom out so you can kind of get a sense for this, right? So before it was actually a little flat and now it's a little bit brighter. But what we need to do is we need to pull up this. So our black background, this area, particularly up here and probably in the clothing here, won't, the pieces will stay connected basically. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull this up to about, what I found is about 80 seems to work. Doesn't need to be precisely that, but that should be good. Now this flattens out the image, but what it's going to do is it's going to make sure that the material stays connected, and that is kind of an important factor. So let me go ahead and I'm going to go back into filter, pixelate, halftone. It's going to remember my last settings. I'll hit OK. Now you can see how the circles are all, the black circles will kind of fall out and the white will stay connected throughout the whole thing. So that looks like it's working well. And the image is easier to see if I zoom out, right? So that's a lot of little holes. So I'm going to actually go, like I was saying, back in my history, and I'm going to make my number here under, let's see, color halftone, my maximum radius of the size of the holes. Basically, instead of being 20 pixels, if I make them 40 pixels, they become a lot larger circles. So they, in many ways, loses detail, but it will take a lot less time to cut on the laser cutter. Now this, I think, we might actually lose some of the understanding of the image because the holes are twice as large. So you kind of have to decide what works best for your image and maybe do it like at 20, at 30, at 40, and see what works. Because you want it to be, you know, this many holes, this might take 10 minutes to cut. It might take 20 minutes to cut the other size. And, you know, actually, in many ways, that was 4 times the number of holes because it was double the resolution. So it could be 10 minutes for this and it could be 40 minutes for that. And we really do have limited time on the laser cutter. So that's why I would say let's keep our size to only 8 by 10 and keep our size of holes the largest possible while still being able to understand the image. All right, so I'm going to save this out. Just going to save it as my on my desktop here, and it's just a JPEG is perfectly fine. So when I get into Illustrator, I'm going to make a new document. 8 by 10 is fine. We want to keep it relatively small. And I'm going to do File, Place. I'll grab my file that I created in Photoshop and drop it in. I can kind of click anywhere. What I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it down by holding onto one corner and Shift and dragging it down. I'll make it about 8 inches wide. And then I'll center it in here. So we have a relatively nice border on all 4 sides. Then I'm going to go to Object, Image Trace, Make and Expand. That will convert this image into paths. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little blue path around everything. I'm going to go into Layers, and you'll see in this group, there are probably hundreds of little paths for each circle. I'm going to go all the way to the bottom where it says Compound Path. And this is a path for the background, the white space. And I can just take that path and throw it away. And then I'll grab the bottom one, drag all the way up to the top, hold down Shift and grab all the paths. And what I want to do is I want to set the fill for the path. Instead of being black, I'm going to make it this red slash through a white box, which is transparent. And I'll grab the stroke for this, and I need to double click on that box, and it'll give me this. And I can just grab the red in the top right corner. That's what the computer is going to need in order to know what to cut. And then we'll go to Properties. And for our stroke width, what we want is 0.01. which makes it really thin. Now, these things we're going to have to double check when we get into the laser cutter software and make sure it's working right. And it's kind of faint and hard to see here, but if I zoom in, it becomes a little bit clearer, right? Or we can see them. But basically, that's the settings that the machine needs, is that thickness and that color red. And we'll go in and we'll double check it in the actual computer when we get there. But this file is now ready to open in the computer software in order to fully cut it. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to save the file out. And I'm going to go to File, Save As. And I always save this both as an Adobe Illustrator file, and then I'll go back in and save it again. And I believe it is a SVG file that and this may be different, but we've been using Corel Draw on the laser cutter, and I believe that it requires an SVG file. But I'm told we may have Adobe Illustrator working on that computer now, or we may even have some other software. So bear with me on that one, but save it out as at least an Adobe Illustrator file.